Daniele Bianchi is the assistant professor of the finance at Warwick Business School, joins me now via Skype to discuss the cryptocurrency. Daniele, before we get on to what Deutsche Bank is warning about, a possible crash for 2018, let's talk about that start that Bitcoin had on the futures. I mean, the rally was so much that it triggered halts on the exchange. I mean, what's happened since?
Yeah, thanks for having me, first of all. Yeah, the rally was kind of expected because, I mean, there has a lot of excitement over the last week, 10 days about the launch of Bitcoin future contract. So I'm not surprised at all. Keep in mind, however, that, I mean, it's true that the market activity has been really, an excitement and positive, but the volume of transaction is still like a tenth of, for instance, the euro-dollar contract. So it's true that it has been like a good market activity, but as expected, nothing really spectacular so far.
So only a tenth of what's happening on the euro contract. Do you see more room for growth in Bitcoin futures?
Yep. Yeah, it could be. I mean, part of the reason why the amount of transaction is smooth so far is due to the fact that Bitcoin futures are traded with a huge bid-ask spread and huge margins, which kind of prevents standard investors to jump into the business, if you like. And that's part of the story is due to the fact that they want to limit in some way systemic risk due to the high volatility of cryptocurrencies in general.
Yeah, and increased transparency and regulation of the cryptocurrency. But Daniela, I must ask, for the new investors who are jumping into Bitcoin right now at these ridiculous prices, I mean, what's their demand factor?
Oh, wow, that's a good question. Everything is driven by demand here because, as we know, the supply of Bitcoin coins is fixed to 21 million by 2040. It's difficult to say what drives demand. Probably is basically everything is driven by market sentiment. The more and more legitimacy Bitcoin gets from the public opinion and investors, the more aggregate demand there will be.
Let's talk about that legitimacy, because many see the futures as being a first step towards that direction. I mean, how soon do you think it will be before Bitcoin is accepted on formal exchanges to trade as a formal and legitimate asset class?
Yeah, I guess that depends a lot on how the initial trading on Bitcoin futures will go, and especially depends on if prices kind of stabilize. So far, Bitcoin is just too volatile for normal exchanges to jump into the business. For normal investors to jump into the business, you have fluctuations in the order of 20% a day, and no normal investor can actually take that risk. So it all depends on how much stability Bitcoin will get, given now we have new mainstream instruments for trading on it.
And Deutsche Bank, they're calling Bitcoin a potential risk for 2018, calling on a possible popping of the bubble next year. What's your view?
I mean, it depends. So in terms of systemic risk, I don't see any particular systemic risk. And first of all, because the size of Bitcoin is still limited. I mean, it's like the market capitalization of Bitcoin is like a third of Apple. So volumes and transactions are still relatively low. So I don't see any big risk for financial markets. It's true, however, that there could be a crash. The reality is that nobody can really say when, because it's difficult to say what kind of fundamentals there are behind Bitcoin in the first place. So it's very possible that prices will collapse at some point, but it's possible the opposite as well. So no collapse in prices, and prices will keep growing. I guess it's very difficult to say right now, as I said, because it's very difficult in the first place to understand what kind of fundamentals there are behind Bitcoin. As I said, here the demand is mainly driven by investor excitement and public legitimacy. So as far as this thing will keep growing, I don't see any crash in prices.
And what about the underlying technology of Bitcoin, the blockchain? Last week, it was Australia's stock exchange, I understand, that has now started using that underlying technology there to settle some of its trades. Do you see blockchain technology being more embraced by more exchanges around the world in future?
Definitely. I mean, people tend to forget, but the big thing is really not Bitcoin, but it's the blockchain. So the underlying technology is just, amazing for all of the applications you can imagine, even outside the financial markets. So I'm pretty sure the Australian Stock Exchange has been a first mover, but others will follow, and that possibly will give even more legitimacy to cryptocurrencies in general, and Bitcoin in the first place, being the leader of the market.
Daniele, just going back to the price that most people are interested in with Bitcoin, I was reading an article, the Winklevoss or the Winklevoss brothers, they see Bitcoin increasing by as much as 20-fold going on from these levels. I mean, a very optimistic forecast there. Would you agree?
Well, reality is that now everybody has his own different forecast. As I said, it's difficult to give any rationality behind this forecast because, as I said, it all depends on how the public and investors will embrace Bitcoin in the future. It's very difficult to say. I guess nobody can really give any rational forecast. As I said, I would expect that the prices will increase in the short term, definitely, and that part is driven by, the increasing legitimacy that Bitcoin is getting from mainstream investments, from, as you mentioned before, the introduction by the Australian Stock Exchange of blockchain platforms, and so on and so forth. And keep in mind that the introduction of future contracts probably will lead to even more mainstream instruments such as ETFs and more general derivatives. So I don't see that Bitcoin is going back anytime soon. So it's very possible that prices will keep growing until 20,000, 25,000, 30,000, why not?
So I suppose it's at this point where governments, and particularly central banks, need to start taking this seriously.
Yeah, of course they do, and they already do. They're already doing. They're already taking seriously Bitcoin. The ECB, since 2014, is regularly issuing, notes and studies about cryptocurrencies in general. The IMF is doing the same. So, I mean, regulators are taking seriously cryptocurrencies and the blockchain technology behind it. There is no any regulation anytime soon, and part of the reason is because, as I said before, the size of the market is still relatively low. The number of transactions are still relatively low in absolute terms compared to global financial markets, and therefore there is no any justifications for a complete set of rules and regulations. But definitely, regulators are looking at Bitcoin and blockchain very closely.